The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. The Investment Fix podcast. Tune in today.
The Fold is brought to you by oMedia, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. No mai, hoki mai ki a The Fold e mihi ne ko Duncan Greer tōku ingoa. My guest this week on The Fold is Mike Lane, who is, I don't know what his exact job title is. He's the boss of the ACC, the Alternative Commentary Collective, which started life as literally that, just a different stream of commentary on cricket games, and has grown into, I think, one of the most interesting media innovations in New Zealand, and certainly by far the most interesting and innovative thing to come out of any major New Zealand media company in the last few years. It is now a sort of a suite of podcasts, it's events, it's very, especially in its early years, you would listen to the Alternate Commentary Collective, and because they'd gathered together this group of incredible, super surreal 2000s era TV comic talents, and they were all operating in sort of free associative, sort of improv territory. They would say some real eye-wateringly freaky stuff that was incredibly brand unsafe, and yet somehow it's become, I think, a really, really interesting and important commercial driver for NZME. Largely because it was left alone to grow without too much oversight for the first few years. So the thing about Mike is, this is probably his third time doing something really, really interesting. He started the Beige Brigade, which basically took over and created the whole sort of fan culture of New Zealand cricket, gave it an impetus and a centralising force. New Zealand cricket, as he'll detail, has had a pretty distant relationship to it. It's come and gone, and I think they understand the value there, but they can't quite embrace it because it is, it violates a lot of the very straight up and down and boring norms of New Zealand sports marketing and culture and presentation. Sports always wants to control the product, and in so doing makes the product really boring. The ACC wants to make the product exciting, and the sports bodies and the kind of mainstream kind of good old boys of sports can't stand that because it feels like it's making fun of them when it's actually embracing them. That whole dance is really, really interesting to me. So we talk about that. We talk about the business side of it, and about the extent to which the Beige Brigade experience informed first Hauraki and then the ACC. Look, it's a long one. It's I think a real entertaining one. And if you are interested in the business of media, and particularly how media can innovate and use community and fandom and a little bit of letting go and a little bit of letting people outside of your organization dictate the sort of response to and the framing of your thing, I think that there are just so many lessons in the ACC, and hopefully some of those are on this podcast. Just before we get into it, I have to thank again our sponsors in Vodafone. We are currently recording through Vodafone Network technology. I suggest that if you run a business, you do the same. Head to vodafone.co.nz for more on that. This is Mike Lane from the ACC on The Fold. Kia ora, Mike Lane. Welcome to The Fold.
Kia ora, great to be here.
Thanks so much, man. As I was saying just before we got on, I've been so excited to come on because I think the ACC is just a wildly fascinating, I don't even know what you call it, media brand, sports entertainment company.
Yeah, platform.
Yeah, but it's almost weirdly platformless, like it just exists in a lot of different places. But we will get to that because I want to know where it started, and my theory of it, especially as it pertains to you, who's now running the show full time, is that it's actually way back in a whole different century with the Beige Brigade. Is that fair? And if so, just tell us a bit about the Beige Brigade and how that's informed where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Beige Brigade, for those unfamiliar, was basically back in was kind of the 90s at university, late 90s. I was gifted a 1981 beige uniform, Adidas, original Bruce Edgar Adidas beige uniform by a friend of mine, Dan Vittori, who went on a youth tour to England and bought it at an auction. And he bought it back and gave it to me and said, "You're the only one stupid enough to actually wear this. Here you go." And so we used to wear it to all the games. And a good friend of mine, Paul Ford, we would go along and we'd have so many people ask, "Where did you get that from?" It's amazing. It resonated with the cricket fan because it was the beige. It meant we were such a great team then, but the colours meant nothing. It was like we were dressed by the Australians with leftover material at the factory. And put the West Indians in pink and purple, mate, canary yellow for us, mate. And I've got some of this brown and tan stuff. Give those to the Kiwis. It meant nothing to anybody, and so it struck a chord with a lot of people. And it got to the point where so many people were asking questions around it that Paul and I said, why don't we just start making them and selling them? So we sewed together like 10 for our friends, and they were like literally, luckily I was flatting with a fashion design student down in Canterbury, and she actually taught us how to sew. We unstitched the shirt, and I've still got the patterns at home off the back of a Tui poster. A Tui bear poster is the patterns for the sides and for the front panels. And we slaved away for probably weeks on end and made 10 and sold them to our friends for like $20. And then I think with the Beige Brigade and the cricket, it really took off when we toured Australia. And it was that great Shane Bond moment at Adelaide. We had a group of 12 of us go over there, and that's where the Beige Brigade really got some momentum and some media momentum. And then we came home and we had so many requests for shirts. We then had to engage some little old ladies from Hamilton who made them for us. And they made 100, and we thought that was a big deal. And then it just escalated from there, and we had to get more and more serious about it if we wanted to, because the demand was huge. And obviously New Zealand Cricket took note. Funny story from that is Paul and I set up the Beige Brigade Limited, and we set up the company, and we were selling these shirts. We sent our first $100 we ever made to New Zealand Cricket, and said, here's who we are. We're Beige Brigade. We're about passion, not fashion. This was our ethos. We were long-suffering New Zealand cricket fans. We'd been through a lot. So we're trying to bring we were bringing some passion back, and here's $100. Please don't spend it on any crap marketing campaigns like the Mad Caps, which was a manufactured group to try and counter the Barmy Army, and it was just made us cringe. Anyway, I got a nice letter back from Martin Snedden because we, at the end of it, suggested that New Zealand should return to beige because, obviously that's our true colours, and it was a joke. Anyway, a letter came back from Martin Snedden explaining the amount of money that's been spent on the Black Caps brand and launching the Black Caps, and they will never play in beige again. Thank you very much. And they banked the $100. Don't worry about that. The cheque got banked. And then it was just lovely to see a few years later when the first ever T20 International was played at Eden Park, they played back in beige. And Paul and I have kept the Dom post, the one they put outside the dairy, and it just said back in beige, and it had Hamish Marshall's big afro, and we've both got those framed on our wall at home because it's just like, here we go, back in beige.
I mean, and that must have felt incredible, because that is, that literally doesn't happen without, any of what you got up to. Yeah,
totally. And it was really frustrating. It was frustrating dealing with New Zealand cricket at the time because they didn't recognise the fact that the fans had developed this, and it was a very fan-driven. We are just massive cricket fans, and they basically put them in beige for that T20 so that their official supplier could then make them and sell them as well, because they saw how many were being sold. And they said it was a nod to the players of the 80s. And I was like, come on, man, you could have just given you could have given us a small hat tip to the fans. So that's why we grenaded that game, and we offered a pallet of lime brown to the club team whose player grew the best moustache. So, we went to like Lancaster Woolston in Canterbury was Chris Cairns' club at the time. I think it was University, and Hamilton was Vittori's. The Marshalls, I think, was like Mangakatamia, so we got all those clubs were pressuring their players to grow moustaches so they could get a palette line brown for their end of year function. So that's why we grenaded it, and they all had moustaches. Hamish teased his hair out, and we kind of we grenaded it that way. And you could tell that New Zealand cricket had been wringing their hands again because it was all about the dress up almost. It became a dress up, but little did we know the phenomenon that T20 was going to develop into after that joke start. But it's in the Beige Brigade. Well, I was a massive cricket fan. So was Paul Ford, and we're still trugging away selling shirts. We've sold over $1 million worth of merchandise, of which, in terms of what we have off the other side, we've had a hell of a good time. We just buy tickets for mates. We've travelled around the world following the team, and we've bought the most ridiculous merchandise ever. We own one of the underarm balls from the underarm game. We bought Richard Hadley's car that he won in 1986, the Alfa Romeo that he kept, and it nearly sent the team into turmoil. We found it, and we own it. So we've got that Alfa Romeo in storage down in Wellington. We don't know what to do with it.
This is an alternate museum in waiting, right?
Totally is. Paul, he lives down in Wellington. His garage is just to the gunnels because we'd go to these because the idea was we never wanted to make money from it. We were just having a good time. It was a hobby. And we would go to those gala dinners, and we'd just buy the most ridiculous merchandise with all of our money. We've got a signed Bill Brown and Walter Hadley photo of them in the first Test match New Zealand Australia at the Basin. We just buy this ridiculous stuff, and it's all in storage at Paul's house. We gave some to the Te Papa held the ball for a while, and we've given a lot of it to the New Zealand Cricket Museum in the Basin as well. So it's been a hell of a good time. And then, it comes to a natural end, I guess. We were running tours. I actually left New Zealand for 5 years and ran the Beige Brigade in London. We ran tours, went to World Cups. We took 500 people to the infamous France All Blacks game at Cardiff. We did running of the Bulls, Beer Fest, La Tomatina. It was a good time, but then it all came crashing down during the GFC in London.
But I mean, fundamentally, it's the culture around cricket specifically that has created it. I think because it's such a languorous game and it attracts odd characters, it sort of lends itself towards it. But the thing that strikes me as the really piercing insight is that the fan culture around a sport or a team is much more interesting than the kind of highly managed kind of Powerade and a sort of in a nondescript field kind of way that sports is traditionally marketed, and that feels quite sort of foundational to what the ACC has become. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It was the Beige. It's so much more genuine when it comes from the fans, and it came from a really good place. Like Paul and I had a hell of a good time with the Beige Brigade, and it was a really proud moment. Even going to Lord's. Probably it was about 10 years ago now, and there were more beige shirts in the crowd than actual, and we were just laughing, going, "This is hilarious," But obviously, the commercial elements of New Zealand cricket weren't laughing because their official merchandiser at the time was W Star. Were livid because obviously we were shifting more beige shirts than they were shifting replica shirts. But it was a great feeling, and like you mentioned, cricket is a strange game played by very strange people and followed by even stranger people, because it's, you look at the characters that get spit out of cricket, like the Mark Richardsons of the world. They're very odd people. Sir Richard Hadley, he's deemed as a little odd. You've got Jeremy Coney, you've got these personalities that come out of it because it's a game, like you're saying, it's long. There's a lot of individual focus, but you're part of a team, but it's still a very individual sport. You spend days on end in the field by yourself or batting by yourself or with one other person. And it takes a lot to be a cricket fan. You've got to invest a lot, and it's really hard introducing people to the game who haven't, been there for a while. And, the fact we've got 3 formats now, trying to explain that to an American who just wants baseball or NFL. There's one format. There's not a 3-hour format, an 8-hour format, and a 5-day format. And don't even get started on power plays and fielding restrictions. And you know what I mean? It's so bizarre and so complex that once you get into it, you can't stop.
Absolutely. And yet, I mean, there's this beautiful tension, I think, that you must have felt throughout this whole period that you've been doing these things where, as I said before, there's this kind of very self-serious way that the sports like to present themselves, which is both a product of their, I think, quite bad attempts to commercialize these things, because great marketers don't tend to be there.
Yeah.
But then there's also that also flows into the coverage of it, So I think there's something quite amazing, which we'll get to later on, about the way that the Brian Waddle is your stereotypical commentator of sports. And I remember when the ACC started, there was this real he reacted with this visceral loathing, that this very serious way of, time-honoured way of presenting the game was being challenged by these people. As you went through Beige Brigade and into ACC, now it feels like it was kind of preordained, and I'm sure that all the sports organisations embrace you in various capacities, because you're their one shot at kind of bringing in new audiences and making the thing have any fun. But initially there must have been a huge sense from those organisations, both the sports bodies themselves, but also the related things like radio sport, conventional sports reporters, that you were doing something awful.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, ironically, our first season was 2014-15, and it was ironically funded by New Zealand Cricket. It was out the back of that horrendous South African tour, the Brendan McCullum, Ross Taylor bust-up. We got bowled out.
Oof.
Remember, we got bowled out for 42 or something. I think New Zealand Cricket was at the lowest of lows. And we worked with a good friend of ours, Matt Dickinson, who runs True agency, who just secured New Zealand Cricket as a client. And he actually helped us pitch the idea of, let's put a fully fan-based commentary team together and give it a go. And I think to the point where I think potentially New Zealand Cricket, we've got nothing to lose here. So they actually funded that first season where I borrowed a mate's caravan, and I rang Jeremy, and Jeremy then rang Jason Hoyt, and then Jason Hoyt then rang someone else, and then Jeremy rang Lee Hart, and then I rang Paul Ford, and then I rang Matt Heath, and they were all massive cricket fans. And then, we just started. We had no idea what we were doing, to be honest. And Jeremy and I, before the first ever game was New Zealand-India, McLean Park, in a caravan that I just borrowed off a mate from Raglan, put some signage on the outside, and we went to Hallenstein's and we bought the $99 special, so you get the pant, the jacket, the tie and the shirt, and we all bought Hallenstein's suits. Little did we know that was probably the biggest bugbear for Brian Waddle, was the fact that we got given uniforms, the fact we bought them ourselves. So they funded that. We had no idea what we were doing really, but we knew what we were going to do, and we knew what we wanted and what our friends wanted, and that was to follow the cricket, ball by ball. I still want to know what the score is. I still want to know the state of the game and a little bit of insight, but I'm actually not bothered by all the stuff in between. So just like you go into the game with your mates, you sit on the embankment, you engage with the game every now and then, but really you're catching up with your mates, telling yarns, telling stories. And that was the rule. The rule was when the bowler's coming in to bowl, you shut up and let Jason or Jeremy call the action. But in between that, fill your boots. And we were pretty lucky in the fact that we were on iHeartRadio, so we had the official rights with New Zealand Cricket. So we were playing by the book then. So we were legit. We were allowed into the grounds. They put the caravan there. But we were very much treated as the fact that this is just a bit of a joke. These guys, whatever. They actually just didn't, they had no idea of what we were doing and didn't care. They kind of almost let us just do it. But then we discovered after the probably first 2 or 3 games that we were onto something. We were onto something because I think people were up for a change and needed to be re-engaged, and it was fellow fans talking rubbish. And look, and to be fair, in the early days, we were on a digital-only platform 6 years ago. There's no BSA outside of defamation, so a story could go anywhere, and it did. You had Lee talking about driving Mumbai taxis, and it would just go in crazy places, and you could do anything, and people, I think, were just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm hearing. I feel like I'm eavesdropping on these guys talking about cricket." And yeah, the traditional, I think the likes of Brian and even Sky TV just actually saw it more as an annoyance than a threat at all. They just thought, "Oh God, not these guys again." And we And we didn't mind it. We didn't mind. That was good for us. Being the underdog was great, and it suited us perfectly. And then after that first Indian series, there were 5 games. We won that series, I think 4-0, and one was tied. And it felt like New Zealand cricket was on a roll, and we were starting it. It was stupid. But then we had the World Cup after that in the following year, the 2015 World Cup, and we managed to get in there. We had their rights again, but yet they wouldn't let us put the caravan anywhere near the ground. So in Wellington, for example, we were facing the railway lines. So our window of our caravan faced the railway lines, and then we had a TV. That's how much they didn't want us anywhere near the ground. And then there was the infamous moment where we got blamed for driving a drinks trolley on the ground and thrown out of the World Cup, which in the end was the best thing that ever happened to us. But yeah, and now I guess we're almost part of the furniture almost when it comes to the cricket coverage. And
that's what I find so fascinating, right? Because you've almost replaced. You have functionally replaced radio sport at what was formerly the home of radio sport, and it's just sort of quite a mind-boggling thing to think about. Is that it reminds me a lot of the way that Jeremy Wells satirised Mike Hosking and then took over his job.
Yes.
That you guys started out as this weird parody of radio sport and then have functionally replaced radio sport within its parent organisation as the kind of the sports commentary. But it's not like, the real sports commentary barely exists, and you guys are enormous. It's very upside down world. That must, in a similar way to watching beige spread throughout the stadium, being part of the organisation through all that must have a surreal quality.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it does, and the world's link as well, because seeing people in the Steady the Ship hats, which is an ACC nickname for Kane Williamson, and they're in beige, or they're wearing a black flap which we got, and these two worlds intercollide, and it's like, oh my God. New Zealand cricket must just shake their head and go, need to get rid of these guys. Like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
But they look, they're pretty good. New Zealand cricket, I must admit, have got a lot better. I think the biggest threat from them comes commercially. And we are now, ACC is a focus for NZME, and a focus for NZME means, it needs to contribute financially to the company. So obviously we're out in the market scrapping for sponsorship dollars potentially alongside New Zealand cricket and sometimes against New Zealand cricket. And we have to get more inventive, and we can be, that's the beauty of the ACC, I guess, and that our platform is we can be more creative and a bit more out there than normal sponsorships. Like for the Steady the Ship hat, for example, was a client activation for Fonterra. And having Fonterra come on board with the ACC is like, that's a pretty conservative. Can't get more mainstream
than the farmers who are growing who are making the milk.
Yeah, so we partnered with Mammoth, the flavoured milk for I think 3 or 4 seasons, and it worked perfectly for them because the hats you got a free hat with 2 mammoths from BP, and it just went through the roof. But that started off as a client activation, that hat, and now those hats are everywhere. So you go to the cricket and every second person's wandering around with a captain's hat on. That's great. It's good to. It is weird to see. You're right. It is strange to see, but then again, it shows how passionate people are if it's not coming from a disingenuous place. I guess we're genuine fans, and we genuinely want to make cricket a great experience. So hence the hats and the shirts and the songs and the nicknames and all that carry on.
Yeah, it's a very real and intentionally made culture that comes from its own place. Like you can always tell when these things are, like the desire not to offend anyone at all leads to these incredibly bland products. Your madcaps, like, for example, versus. One of the things that's most fascinating to me is just how offensive a lot of what is said on the commentary is. It feels like if you were trying to design an unsafe environment for brands, it would be that. But it almost seems immaterial because every single person listening is sort of consent-based opting in to hear it all.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're right. There is a consent when coming in because it's not. You can't accidentally come across the Alternative Commentary Collective. You've actively got to seek it out. There is, So I think you're right there, but. Yeah, and some of the content was 6-7 years ago. We developed along with the times at the moment, and we are now, we're covering Super Rugby, we're covering Black Caps on Spark Sport, the Super Rugby on Sky and iHeart and Hauraki, and we're partnering with New Zealand Netball, and Storm Purvis is going to lead our netball coverage of the Silver Ferns games and stuff. So we've got Rugby League with Di Henwood and Ben Hurley who are doing Mad Monday, and working with, and we've got the BYC podcast, the cricket podcast. We're now got to the point where where we were probably, but like you were saying, a little bit offensive and potentially a little bit spiky on the content a few years ago. Now we've broadened out. I think our focus is purely entertainment and fun, and being that alternative option for every single mainstream sport in New Zealand. So if you're watching the netball, there should be us to tune into, which you're going to have a laugh, and and the cricket and the rugby and the league and potentially basketball as well, which is massive. So yeah, it's a pretty unique environment for people to plug into, and some people plug in and immediately plug out, and that's cool. We get quite a few complaints, but it's like, apologies, but you can just not listen. You're
not at all trying to be for everyone, and I think that makes the audience bigger. We'll take a very quick break now and come back with more on the ACC. The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
Back now with Mike Lane, and I do want to explore more of that tension at some point, but I also think one thing we almost skipped a beat when we went from Beige Brigade to ACC, because really that's on me. That's my exuberance, to be honest, that is doing it, because the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, Jesus, this is so fascinating. But the crucial step was that assembly, I think, or you tell me, this is the theory of it, is that Radio Hauraki, you put together a lineup which was basically all of these kind of legends of weird TV comedy in the OOs that were sort of playing late nights, who'd all kind of finished up there for one reason or another, and were kind of, I don't know what the fuck they were up to, but it wasn't enough. And as program director there, you just sort of smushed them all together, and that ultimately was the first generation of ACC talent. Well, do you want to just talk about that? Because in some ways, Hauraki was a similar challenge. It just this brand that had gone stale and forgotten itself. About that link and this chain. Yeah, so the ACC actually, it started before I was involved in the ACC before I started doing Radio Hauraki and taking on the content role there. Funnily enough, I mean, Jeremy and I were doing a BYC podcast and doing cricket content before he joined Hauraki. We actually did alternative updates the season before, where Jerry and I went around the grounds, gave alternative updates, which was us talking to the hot dog stand, doing everything but the cricket. So people would cross to us for the cricket and we wouldn't give them any information on the game. We'd just be interviewing people. And so we were kind of... Where was that playing? That was on Hauraki. So I was working at NZME at the time, but I wasn't involved in Radio Hauraki. I was running the integration team there. So I was kind of pesting on the outside, on the outskirts, and Jerry and I always had wanted to be more involved in cricket. And then the ACC formed, but at that time, Jerry was doing a lot of stuff for Matt Heath on the Drive Show on Radio Hauraki. And then I think things kind of clicked with the cricket, and actually after that first game in Napier was the first Matt and Jerry show the next morning.
And then out of the back of that motley crew, it was like the Suicide Squad of people from the. It was like, we had Lee Hart and Jason Hoyt. Obviously, Lee Hart and the Moon TV and Sports Cafe. Jason Hoyt, Sugar and Spice fame. He was at the time an up and coming umpire. He was umpiring club cricket and had aspirations for first class cricket and international cricket.
Wow.
We had Lee Baker, who was obviously the writer producer of Eating Media Lunch and various other bits with Jeremy. Obviously, Jeremy Wells. And Matt Heath, obviously, with all the Back of the Wire, Carry On and everything. So it was a real motley crew but what brought everyone together was actually they just loved cricket as well, like nobody else. And actually, the breakfast show started first, and then about a year or so, maybe 3 years later, I got involved more with Radio Hauraki, and I became content director of Radio Hauraki. And then we brought Jace and Lee on for the drive show, and they had Bouja in the afternoons. The legendary Bouja radio show, which was the most un-radio show on earth, I think. Every consultant that came near it, we just told them to run for the hills because I think they could not even compute where to start on how to unpack that radio show.
It was a terrifying show. I guested on it a couple of times. I had no idea what to do. Like, I love them, and I think Lee is one of the undersung geniuses of our media, but trying to figure out how to be in that environment between those two presence is terrifying.
It was. And you were right. It got for a while there where ACC and Hauraki were very much joined at the hip because pretty much everyone who was on the ACC now worked at Hauraki, bar kind of Lee Baker and Paul Ford and a few others. So, kind of morphed into each other, but trying to keep the ACC as a... And what really worked well with the ACC and Radio Hauraki is Hauraki was a mainstream radio station, through and through, as a rock station. There were boundaries within the radio realm, whereas the ACC sitting on iHeartRadio and that digital realm was a real creative release for a lot of those guys. Matt and Jerry were limited, usually limited 3 or 4 minutes on a commercial radio station, then shut up, play a song, come back. It's bite size, where they could go onto the ACC and they could extrapolate a story for an hour and a half, non-stop with no interruptions. And I think that creative license for those guys, and particularly Lee and Jace and Lee, not being constrained by radio really helped. So it became, the ACC as a sports wing also became a creative release for those guys. And that's what attracted, people like Di Henwood and Ben Hurley, huge league fans, like tragic league fans, and big cricket fans as well. And they just were attracted to it and said, I want to be part of I want to commentate cricket, I want to commentate rugby league. Can we come and do something? And it's like, that's how the collective kind of grew and grew and grew. And then Scotty Stevenson obviously was with us at the start as well, and he came on board, and then Chris Key and now Storm Purvis, and now we've got Beck Sandys down, he's a comedian down in Christchurch who loves cricket, and Sonia Gray is commentating us on the weekend. So it's like this real motley crew now of just sports fans who just love it.
I think that, like I said before, sports kind of resists this. And it has a tight sense of control. It has this real kind of club rooms. You only really get to be part of it if you've played at the highest level. And I think that it just assumed that that's all that everyone wanted. But I think between that and Sky Television, you had a rapidly shrinking aging and shrinking audience. Yeah. And the irony of, you guys, like you said, kind of grenading into it, not completely unlicensed. No one asked for it from the establishment. Yeah. You also represent, I think, probably the best hope of developing a more varied culture that might actually grow what otherwise could be a shrinking audience and bring people into grounds which are otherwise getting pretty soulless. Yeah. You said that New Zealand cricket has started to kind of figure out a way to relate to you, albeit with this tension of potentially losing the odd sponsor deal to you. How has rugby and maybe some of the other sports organisations related to this, to your increasing scale?
Pretty good, actually. New Zealand rugby, a couple of years ago, we started covering rugby, and the nicknames really started to take off with, Ben from accounts and, all that kind of stuff. And the names started to make their way into mainstream media. And I think with the nicknames especially, it kind of softened the blow. I mean, it made them more relatable. That's, I think, with the cricketers as well. And we had a couple of really big supporters within the All Blacks, Kieran Reid being one of them. He's commentated a few test matches with us, huge cricket fan. You saw in the Blacklash can hold a bat as well. Internally there was a few supporters within the All Blacks. And I think eventually, New Zealand Rugby saw the benefit in having another channel that was effectively talking to a different audience. Now, we're not talking to the rugby head who just wants to hear Nisbo and they just want to go dive deep with John Kerwin and Jeff Wilson at halftime into the tackle counts. But like me and like Matt Heath and even James McConey to a degree, we love rugby. I love watching rugby, but I'm not a massive rugby head. I don't really want to get into the intricacies of the ruck laws and scrumming and stuff like that. I just want to talk some rubbish and watch some rugby and make it fun and think up playing stupid songs and, parody songs left, right and centre and nicknames and whatnot, and actually just have a little bit of, put a fun lens through it, because I think rugby especially had a perception of being quite dull and humourless. And that's probably from years of just the media training and not getting them, talking to players. You don't get much out of them. But in reality, the players are actually they're pretty good. But I think it's just over years of just being it drilled into them that seems fairly soulless. So, but now it's a lot. I mean, to be honest, a lot better now, because all these players have got their own social media channels now. So you can actually see that they're actually got a bit of personality and they're funny, and you've got guys releasing their own podcasts with Artie Severe, and they're actually, that's opened it up a little bit, I think, and made them more I don't know, that's a bad thing, more human, but and I think rugby have welcomed us along, so I don't think it's definitely not a threat to the mainstream. They see it as a growth opportunity, especially with the younger audience who are slightly so disengaged with it. Same with New Zealand Netball approached us as well, with the same reasons. They were like, look, we're not talking to the younger audience, even younger males. Like, why aren't they interested in netball? So they've got the older traditional crowd, but let's put a lens on it that actually engages some younger audience. Whether that's using, more social media and video, podcasting, a different commentary option. So I think most of all the major sporting bodies are into it now. There's still a little bit of tension with New Zealand cricket, obviously, all the time with us, for whatever reason. Of course, there's a little bit of tension there because obviously MediaWorks have the radio rights to the cricket through Rover, and obviously we're NZME, but we're partnering with Spark Sport to broadcast on Spark Sport's platform. So there's all sorts of stuff going on there in the background that causes New Zealand cricket at a few issues, and they change staff every couple of years, and we have to start again once we get their trust. They disappear, and we get someone else in who says we're bad for the game. But all in all, I think they've seen what the ACC is, and that is sports entertainment. It's fans. There's no, like I keep saying to a few people, like we are entertainment, sports entertainment at the expense of editorial integrity. We're not doing takedowns of people. We're not criticising. We're actually just fans who love it and want to have a good time. And I think that slowly worked out that it's actually a really good thing, for the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the parallel universe where ACC doesn't exist, these sports are in a lot more trouble. I mean, they're already it's hard out there, in a globalized entertainment market, but the New Zealandness of it is probably it's not something the government would ever condone or subsidise, but it truly probably has had the biggest positive impact on the sort of broadening out a sports audience than any kind of more official initiative. The one thing that I'm really fascinated by is the fact that this has all grown out of NZME, which is a media conglomerate by New Zealand standards, and they are rightly known for running businesses well, but being really, really terrible incubators of businesses. You see a media brand that started by a corporate and it'll be basically horrible. Yeah. And yet ACC somehow, has I think you described it before we started as like a P-lab started in the cupboard of NZME.
Like a clandestine.
And it feels that way.
Clandestine P-lab in the basement. Yeah. It was, and like that is pretty much how it did start like that. And we've had really good support. We've obviously terrified the bejesus out of a lot of execs over the years around what we've done and, how we've done it. But they basically, Jeremy and I were given a pretty long leash because they, at the start, admittedly, didn't think they think much of it. They said, "I'll just let these guys have some fun in their borrowed caravan It's not costing us anything because New Zealand Cricket had paid for the first season. And then very quickly discovered that they're onto something here. And iHeartRadio was in its infancy then. And I think for the first time to actually even explain to the audience what iHeart was, the ACC was a prime example. You could only get it on digital radio. It's a digital platform. It's not terrestrial. You can't tune into your radio. You've got to go online and you've got to stream some audio. And 7 years ago, that was quite new for a lot of people in terms of what it was. So it almost helped iHeart in terms of explain it to the market and explain it to the audience. And over the years, obviously, as the audience grew, so did the interest from commercial partners. And that's when NZME knew that that's where the potential is. And that's why now, that's all I do as the alternative commentary collective. NZME are investing in it, but obviously they're looking for a return, but they can see the value in it. And saying that, they also knew that they had to protect what the ACC stood for, and that was often, pretty out there sports content, pretty out there personalities, sometimes doing some pretty out there stuff. And every now and then, they come down and slap you around the face a couple of times, and then you carry on with it. But you're right, it's a rare to incubate something like that. But I think they trusted what Jeremy and I were doing and what our goals were. And now that it's a kind of quite a well-resourced department now, they actually believe in it, and it to be a contributor to a serious contributor to NZME, both audience-wise and commercially as well.
Yeah, so it's probably. I mean, I just read NZME's annual report. It didn't have anywhere near enough about the ACC in it. The reason I say that is not, just to gas you up because you're here, but it's like if I'm sort of thinking about the growth opportunities for them and kind of wholly owned brands that still have a lot of legroom, and we'll get to that shortly. Like ACC sort of screams out amongst them to me. Just we're sort of getting near the end. There's two more things I want to talk about. The first is the Black Clash, which my colleague Callum Henderson memorably describes as, I'm paraphrasing here, but feels like it should be for charity but isn't, which I just thought was that's a
great line.
It's such a good line. Because that, again, how did it come about? And it's sort of suddenly, it's been going for like 10 minutes and feels like it'll go for 100 years. Like it's become part of this kind of summer furniture, and in a weird way is like become kind of the most popular match of the summer somehow. Like it's like our Boxing Day test or something, but it's just absolutely not a proper sporting event. Like explain yourself.
It's madness. Like, I mean, we are hired by TVNZ to commentate that game. It's put on by Duco. They got the concept from South Africa. South Africa have been doing that for years, the rugby players.
Right, so this isn't yours.
No. Black Clash. Black Clash. We're just a commentary team that put a kind of ACC lens through it. But it is right in our wheelhouse in terms of what it is.
It feels almost unimaginable that it would have worked without the ACC kind of creating an environment where these former players have this weird culture created around them.
And all of them all got nicknames, and they were all around like the Hairy Javelin and Grant Elliott and stuff like that. But the Black Clash, it's one of those things. I suppose that's kind of it encourages us about the fact that sports entertainment is crucial, and it's having a sellout crowd of 10,000 people in Tauranga had a real Sevens vibe to it. I think the cricket was almost secondary to everything else that was going on. There was a great shot in that Black Clash where they were panning around the corporate tables, which were on the boundary, and they had glassware as well, and it was right in Cow Corner. I can't believe that there weren't shards of glass sprayed across corporates, but it panned across the tables, and just casually as you like, there was a guy just standing on his head, and it just went past, and he was, and then it carried on, and then it cut to another camera where Scott Robinson was on a Segway going past the hot pools, the spa pools, and then just bailed and did a forward roll, and we were commentating going, this is great. This is what it's all about. This is what it's all about. It's everything that was going on. There was a whole over where they played Darude, and there was a section of the crowd that just danced for the whole over. They didn't care what was going on in the game. Yeah, it's an interesting one, but people love it. It's just I suppose they don't get that leash when they go to games that are run by the associations or the sports bodies because they can't be seen to be doing that, if you know what I mean. Like, New Zealand Cricket would never allow some of that behaviour. They'd all be biffed out in a second. But since it's run by a promoter, they're like, get some more beers to those guys immediately. So it's a different vibe. And I know that David White and New Zealand Cricket were at that game, and and saw what was happening and, the vibe they created. And it was almost like basketball. There was constant entertainment. Any break and play, there was music, and there was Brody Kane on the field. There was someone in the crowd doing something, or someone shooting tennis T-shirts into the crowd, or Scott Robinson riding around getting the crowd going and doing some breakdancing. And it had that kind of vibe to it, which I think is unique for New Zealand sports fans. And and they get to see Richie McCaw, let's be honest. Like, they get to see the GOAT, and they get to see like Will Jordan, and you can't underestimate the pull of those big rugby superstars to people to, and coming them watching them play cricket. I think you can't underestimate that. I think if those guys weren't involved, those All Blacks and those, I don't think it would have the same appeal.
No, it's very true. I mean, it does feel like, because if you go to an NBA game, it's just everyone, even just like a boring regular season game, like there is a huge and constant barrage of entertainment at you, whereas a lot of New Zealand sport still feels like it's kind of moribund and it's grudging whenever it does anything outside of the norm, or like that somehow debasing what you should be there for. But there's increasingly few people there at all, so maybe you should try something. That event space feel like, let's just end on kind of the future of the business side of the ACC, because that event space feels wide open to you. The fact is you have filled grounds, created culture within those grounds, basically 4 other organisations with whom you have an at times tense relationship. The Black Clash is absolutely something if you could have done, or you could do variations on. You've now got a suite of podcasts. There's just so much, as much as you've grown, it feels like there's so much more to do. Yes. And now that you're on it full time, what's the plan? Yeah,
it's mildly terrifying, actually, the plan we've got, because we're a very unique business unit in the fact that we have very non-traditional within NZME. We've got no print. We're not a newspaper. We're not a radio station. We don't really exist as a .co.nz. We're this kind of very non-traditional group that sits on iHeart, Facebook, YouTube, wherever the audience is, we're going to. And that's our ethos. But that also means for us that our revenue channels and our revenue opportunities have to be quite unique as well. So it's doing things like, doing revenue shares with clients. It's doing true content partnerships with clients, because they can't put an ad schedule on. We don't have a spot block every hour to 3 minutes of ads an hour, or another print ad. So the way we have to approach our clients is quite unique, and I think that's a strength of ours. The kind of pillars we have are our live commentaries. So, getting clients involved in our live rugby commentary, cricket commentary, netball commentary, and rugby league. Our suite of podcasts, which is a rugby league with Mad Monday, BYC, The Agenda, that gets between 20 and 30,000 downloads and listens a week. And we're looking to grow that and double that. There's obviously the digital audio market in New Zealand is a bit of a sleeping giant. We've seen what's happening in Australia in terms of the revenue they're getting from podcasts. I think it's almost doubled year on year. And in the US, iHeart in the US, I think, grew their revenue 130% on their podcasts last year. So I think it's coming to New Zealand. So it's like we see that as a big revenue opportunity. The live events, like you mentioned, are also big for us. We partnered with Eden Park for what we call the Super Bash, which was basically, there was no cricket at Eden Park. So we dropped the pitch into Eden Park, and people could come and try and hit a 6 at Eden Park, because everyone says they can hit a 6. So, we're over a 1 weekend, people could book a spot and come and try and hit a 6 at Eden Park. We commentated, live streamed it. We're running golf tournaments every quarter, the ACC Open, which is a 9-hole, 3-ball Ambrose format, 2:30 tee off, finished by 6. Perfect for our audience. People came in. We launched it in Pupuki earlier in the year. People came full dress up. They had Yui booms attached to their golf carts. It was just one big party. We want to own the space around tailgate parties, like pre-match parties before All Blacks games. That's a big part of it as well. So we have to be unique in where we look for our revenue streams, and that's a challenge, but it's also, like I was saying before, it's also something unique to provide for clients as well, because they're always looking for something different. Every brief or every client you talk to is like, I don't want a 30-second ad. I don't want this, I want full integration. You're like, well, okay, that's all you're going to get from us, because that's all we've got. So it's the business side of it is it's going to be challenging, and obviously with the whole COVID side of things, people are a bit more cautious about where and when they put their money, and often it comes in very late because they want to know what's happening for Super Rugby, for example. They don't even know if it's going to start, so they don't actually want to put any money into it. So it's kind of quite frustrating for us, and it's probably frustrating for a lot.
Yeah, it's a hard environment.
Yeah.
But as you say, like the fact that you're offering something non-traditional and people almost self-select as being comfortable with your super weird offering by getting involved, that probably makes it easier. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This is so fascinating to me, and just watching the ACC grow and evolve will be a true pleasure over the coming years.
No worries.
That was Mike Lane on The Fold. I want to thank Te Ahe Butler for recording and editing this chat, Jane Yee for running the Spin-Off Podcast Network, and Callum Henderson, who I never thank, but actually has been a huge part of the Spin-Off Podcast Network. And I actually quoted him on this podcast. He's an absolute living legend of the Spin-Off. Delightful writer. Check out his byline. And the Spin-Off members. Without you, we're literally nothing. So thanks. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The Spin-Off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.